I want to start, also my information is here, so please do find me on Twitter and connect me on LinkedIn. I want to have a conversation here today with you, so I'm actually going to have a pretty fast presentation part, and then I have a kind of a series of questions that have been really rattling around in my own mind, and I want to take advantage of having all of these very interesting minds in one room to hopefully get some input from all of you here on these problems and ideas that I've been working on myself. So I'll give you a little bit of a presentation about myself and about Futurice so that you understand a little bit the context that I'm coming from. And then I've got a bunch of questions on the next slides, and we'll just go through, and we'll have a microphone running around, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. I want to also shout out to Heather and Marlene and Alexandra, because I think my topic is reconnecting with a lot of the things that were already talked about in the conference, but from a much different side, from you'll see. So I've worked a long time in technology. I call myself a tech practitioner. At core, I'm a designer, but I've also worked as a product manager and a product owner. I do design, but I also do business side of things. Now I've worked in every context possible. I worked in a startup at the beginning of my career, then I worked in big companies, Nokia and Philips. Then 2 years ago, I joined the agency world, and there I'm working also with mostly very big industry partners, also some startups. So I've been in a lot of places and done a lot of things. And at Futurice, Futurice is the company that I'm currently working at as an experience director. It's a pretty big independent agency. It's one of the biggest independents. We're not owned by Accenture or anything like that. We have 8 offices all over Europe. We have 3 offices in Germany. We have several, about half the company is in Finland, which is where we started out. We have kind of end-to-end capabilities inside of Futurice. So we have developers, we have designers, we have researchers, we have business advisors, we have very young people, and we have very mature people. This is also a little bit unusual in the agency world, that we really are working. I mean, we work sometimes for multiple years on the same project with the same big clients. We build back-end platforms. We do a lot of platform work these days, obviously. Hardware and software, but mostly software. That's our motto, love the problem, not the solution. And I think the statement is kind of a good reflection of what I'm going to be doing in this talk today with you, is trying to get into the problem and not so much into the solution. So we do, I'm sort of talking about biometrics in general. So biometrics includes not only computer vision and facial recognition, but it's also, iris scanning or gait recognition that you saw in one of the previous talks yesterday or today, don't remember. We are doing a lot of projects in this area. I'm going to show 3 examples of face recognition. I chose face recognition specifically because I know it's the scariest and the most controversial and the most polemical, and I'm hoping it also will get reaction from all of you. This is our definition of what we call zero UI. I have a little bit of problems with the idea of a zero UI because a camera interaction is still an interface. It's still an interaction. We debate about this internally. We debate internally a lot at Futurice. It's one of the good things about working there. But this is the definition that we're currently working with. And here's the first project that I wanted to show to you. This was one that we did in 2017. We did it in collaboration with Finnair and Finavia. Finavia is the airport administrator, the company that runs the airport in Helsinki. We did a face recognition check-in system, so it was something where it could recognize the person before they got up to the gate, so that they would already be recognized and checked in. It was done as a pilot with a very selective, group of Finnair power users. There was a lot of transparency about how it works with those users. It was also, we didn't store any images. We created, so the user would make a registration on their own mobile phone, and then we created a biometric identifier from the image, and then we did not keep the image, but we kept the biometric ID, and then we would use that ID to recognize them at the gate. People loved it, that's for sure. But I think there has been a lot of press against using face recognition in airports. It's something to be thought about, and I think we're going to talk about it. This is one we did more recently this year with a company called Tyne. We showed this at a conference recently. We had this is in our office I'm going to say the wrong one, in Norway, in Oslo. So we have computer vision for face and for objects, and basically it's for an office environment. You take something out of the refrigerator and you pay for it without having to take any money out or do anything. That's the whole idea. It was a proof of concept. I don't think there's any plan to go very far into this right now, because it's still early days, but there's that. And then this is another fairly recent project, and we did a proof of concept for payment at a cafe. And we did this in a public cafe for, I don't remember how many days. And you walk people through the registration, and they can go up and get a coffee and pay for it by looking at a camera. All right, so now you have the context. Let's have a conversation. So, biometrics, I think there are some really good things you can do with it. I mean, face recognition, notwithstanding, there's, for example, how many? 700,000 refugees in Jordan who are using biometric identification through their eyes, iris recognition, to pay for things inside of the refugee camps. This is a World Food Service project that's been going for a couple of years already. And the dream of that project isn't that you can pay for groceries with your biometrics. The dream of the project is that, in the post-nation state world, you could have all of your documentation on a decentralized blockchain, so that when you want to, if you get displaced for whatever reason, you go to your new home country, all of your documents are there for you, and they're connected to your body, not to a file or something that can be lost. So you can prove that you have a university degree, so that you can continue your education in your new country, or you can prove that you have certain kinds of accreditation, so that you can get a job and get integrated faster into your new environment. But then the question is it possible for us to have the good stuff and none of the bad stuff? I don't think I'm not going to detail all the bad stuff, because I think everyone here is actually hyper aware of what the bad stuff is, and maybe less aware of what the good stuff is. There's a wide spectrum of users for face recognition. Yeah, so there's some things that are that's totally fine. I think that opening your iPhone with your face, that's not a big. It's not super controversial, as far as I'm aware, though maybe you all surprise me. And there are things that are absolutely, obviously not okay, that we need to really stand up against. For example, identifying you and profiling you inside of a supermarket without your permission. I mean, I think in this crowd, you probably think that even with permission, it's not a good idea. But that's up for debate, I think. So how and where are we going to draw the lines? I think I've already heard somebody yesterday say, no, just draw the line at all. But I think that's not really reasonable. I don't know. Maybe I can be wrong. Also, I want to say that I'm coming to you with a real spirit of generosity and openness in my heart. I have been wrong about many things in the past, so I'm open to hearing what you think and seeing things that I don't see yet. This one is really bumping around in my brain a lot, actually. Are there technologies that are incompatible with democracy? One of the things that I've been really thinking about is that sort of spectrum of, I work in new technology for most of my career, so I worked on location-based services on mobile phones before there was GPS in most mobile phones, so I've been building the foundations of the surveillance state for my whole career. I'm totally guilty. And I do struggle a little bit with location services as in the state that they are now. If somebody had the power and the will to know who you were and where you've been, they can do it. Unless if you have a smartphone. If you're a political dissident, don't have a smartphone. Airplanes, you can use them to drop bombs. You can use them to get from A to B. Drones, you can use them to deliver medicines to mountain villages, or you can use them to kill people in the Middle East. I'm not sure about this one. Sometimes I'm thinking the problem is maybe the problem is not the technology, but the fragility of democracy. Maybe Facebook didn't destroy democracy. Maybe the dismantling of the safety net for poor people and the increase in the wage disparity and poverty destroys democracy. Are we focused on the right problems when we focus so much on blaming technology for the fragility of our democracies? I don't know. I know in this conference we're talking a lot about surveillance capitalism and less about surveillance. I personally am a little more worried about state surveillance than I am about corporate surveillance. I'm in the minority there. There was I don't know, who saw the Pew research that came out about face recognition? Anybody see that? Nobody? That's a good thing to Google. It's super interesting. It turns out that most Americans are totally fine with the idea of the police using face recognition to identify suspects or dangerous people in a crowded place. That includes brown Americans, by the way. The brown Americans are a little more skeptical than the white Americans, but still the majority think that that's an okay use case, whereas I actually don't think that's an okay use case, and I'm pretty sure nobody in this room does either, but we're not in step with most people on that. This one also goes back to what I was saying before about how, surveillance capitalism, to me, it's like the definition of a first world problem. Really, I'm more worried about what happens when the next murderous dictator comes to power. How are we going to get rid of them, considering the systems that we're building? Is there any way to avoid that? I don't know. So when you see arguments like the California ban on facial recognition for the police department, it's not a total ban for anything. It's about the cops. the argument is that the algorithms are not accurate enough and that they're biased. But what happens when they're fixed? What happens when they're super accurate? What happens when they can tell all kinds of things about you? I think, I could imagine that with enough data, you could train a face recognition algorithm to detect your political leanings. What do we do when it's super accurate? Why are we only talking about that it's not a good idea because they're not accurate? Yeah, this goes back to what I was saying before. Like, are they technology problems and business problems? I think about the other topic that I think a lot about is the automation of everything and what that's going to do. And I think we need to stop thinking that it's a manufacturing industry problem and start thinking that it's a society problem and a political problem. How do we, maybe the conversation, I'm totally thinking off the top of my head here, but maybe the conversation about, that's focused right now on technology can be used to bring the political and societal conversation in. Maybe it's like a lever that we can use to have the conversation about the real things, or maybe it's just easier to pretend that it's social media that's ruining the world and not the way that we've built our culture. Okay, so I'm going to go back because I'm very interested to hear from you. So I don't want to talk anymore. I really want to hear what you think, and you can be as mean as you want. I'm super tough, so bring it on.
Okay, who wants to be mean? Okay, I'll start here with Alexandra.
I think it's not I'm not a very mean person, but a thought, I guess, on the idea or the challenge that we have of thinking of a total history of a person. So my father, who's unfortunately passed now, had his first heart attack at 40 and ended up with one of the first bypass surgeries in Canada. And had a scar that was kind of quite high up. Because it was a new thing, he also didn't tell his job. And so he just went back into work and, did 30-odd years at an energy company, so a very large, nationally owned company. And his colleague once saw his collar a little bit open, so the top of the scar was visible. And his colleague just said, you should button your collar, because the colleague had identified that my father had had surgery and hadn't said anything. And the colleague never said anything, and therefore my father was able to be a functional employee, human being on this planet and in his job. And so the world that we talk about when we talk about everything being disclosed is a world where we start to punish people for things that we think we should punish them for. And so how do we still have mechanisms that are human because people decide that the system in particular cases are wrong? And how does that not become a giant customer service issue? Because it becomes, but the system in this case, and but the system in that case, and then it becomes the world of exceptions rather than world of any automation whatsoever.
That's totally right. And another project that I'm working on right now is to sort of build a taxonomy of why automated systems fail and how to mitigate for those failures in the systems that we're building. Because in my work so far, I'm building products that have users' numbers in the millions. It's not, it's impactful if you do it wrong. And as you work on that project, you kind of realize that automated systems always fail for a human reason. It's almost never for a technical reason.
Okay, we've got another question, remark, comment here.
I think it's something totally different, but I heard you say surveillance capitalism is a first world problem thing. I'd like to react on that. I spent 3 months living in Africa. And I did a little a lot of talk about how people think about technology, and it was very much struck me, from at least from my experience there, is that when you talk about internet, they don't really use the word internet in the region where I stayed. They talk about connection, having connection. And it kind of struck me like, okay, but the fundamental, or the thing that they're doing is having connection. They don't really, in my experience, distinguish between sending WhatsApp messages, Instagram updates, or just calling someone using their phone. The phones that they use are Chinese phones. They use Google services or Facebook services. And I kept wondering, the underlying data collection which is being done, it's hard to make conscious to a society which moved from having like very nothing to being dumped into smartphones, cutting a lot of corners. So I wonder whether that kind of like contrasts to your idea about surveillance capitalism being or your statement about it being a first world problem.
Yeah, I might be wrong. It's totally possible that I'm wrong. Is there anybody from Africa in the group? No? Because I think I'm always also cautious when we talk about...
I just want to make an objection for
Please,
the first world. That's so old. That's how old you are. There's just one world. I think you know what happens in Brazil, where they go in Indonesia. If you go to all these other countries, I think there's differences in the world, but there's no first world anymore. There's just one world.
Okay, I'm going to take 2 more comments, and actually we have to round up because. But yes.
Hi, I missed somewhere the word ownership. I would like to be an owner of my facial ID and the owner of what this data is used for, and also be the owner in the future or different circumstances. That, for instance, my data is not suddenly used because we have terrorism or so.
Good.
Right, there's one up there. Oh, and then Peter Mullen, so that's good. Yes, please.
So Alexandra, she mentioned Walter Benjamin, and I think if we take a look at the Frankfurt School, there's quite some good inspiration we can draw there. So Adorno and Horkheimer, they work with a term called like technical rationality, and they actually trace it back throughout history as something that has been the root of some of our greatest humanitarian disasters. And I think it's interesting because some of the questions, at least that you're asking, I think they can be answered by the first step is to sort of challenge the myth of that technology is neutral. And one approach to that, I think, is you say you work for a company with Nordic roots. If we take a look at participatory design, I think end-user programming and a lot of approaches where you include you strive towards inclusivity in society by looking at ownership and agencies in those societies. I think that's the first step, and then working towards policy making. I think it has to go through politics, and in that sense, we need. You can see, especially also in the Nordic countries, there's right now an attack on the humanities, because it's not in like a socio-economical stance. It's not something that that you can see on any bottom line. But a lot of these questions, data ethics, whatever it needs to be, we need some policy makers who are cross-disciplinary, and I think that's an approach that needs to be furthered more. You want it back?
Yes. Okay. Sorry.
Thanks.
And there was one last. I mean, next year we're going to go just stand here, ask one question, and then ask the whole room to give the answer.
Thank you. So, I mean, my background is political. Was as a political scientist. So, to me, everything is political or societal. But that just is a disclaimer. If you have a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. The thing is, political science has like a rep as being really abstract, and it's really not. It's just about studying power dynamics and how they can fail. And at that level, we really need to just find trade-offs. What are the threat models we talk about? What are the advantages and disadvantages? And how bad would an absolute fail of that system be compared to what we can guarantee as an improvement? And we need to guaranteed like minimum improvement against maximum failure, and that should be the baseline when the maximum failure is critical that we need to work against. That's like kind of the rough summary on the political science part of the things that I find really helpful to think about.
Yeah, I think that's great. So I'm going to wrap up because we have another talk, and I really would appreciate anybody who has something to say on this topic or who wants to engage with me on it to reach out. I'll go to the next slide where my email is there again, and I'm pretty easy to find by Googling as well. And I also want to say thanks to ThingsCon for having me, because as you also mentioned earlier, there are very few conferences where practitioners and academics are in the same room talking about the same stuff. And I really appreciate being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.